Hi, I am John Milton. I remember the moment when darkness first announced itself, not as a sudden calamity, but as a quiet visitor that lingered too long. I was still young enough to believe my eyes were loyal servants, still strong enough to read until dawn, still arrogant enough to think that the world would always remain visible to me simply because I needed it. At first, the letters on the page softened, as though the ink itself had grown tired. I blamed the candles, the long nights, the strain of study. I told myself that rest would restore what effort had dimmed. Yet, even as I spoke these assurances aloud, something in me already knew they were untrue. I began to notice how light behaved differently. The sun no longer struck my vision with the same certainty. Shadows clung longer than they should have, stretching and blurring at their edges. Faces across a room lost their firmness, becoming impressions rather than forms. I did not confess this to anyone. Silence was easier than fear. To admit weakness felt like surrender, and surrender was a language I had not yet learned. England itself was restless then, torn by voices that demanded allegiance, faith, and obedience. The air was thick with argument, with scripture and steel. I believed my work mattered in such a time, that my mind had been sharpened for a purpose larger than comfort. I wrote with urgency, as though speed might outrun fate. Each page felt like a victory stolen from the future, each completed thought a small defiance against whatever threat hovered at the edge of my sight. But darkness does not hurry, it waits. There came a night when the room dissolved around me. The walls, the desk, the familiar outline of my own hand faded into a gray uncertainty. I closed my eyes and opened them again, expecting correction. Nothing changed. Panic rose slowly, like water seeping through stone. I stood and reached forward, touching the table, only to reassure myself that it still existed. I laughed softly, alone, trying to convince myself that this was nothing more than exhaustion. Yet my laughter sounded thin, unconvincing, even to me. I began to pray then, not with the confidence of faith, but with the desperation of bargaining. I asked why a mind willing to serve truth should be housed in a body that betrayed it. I asked what purpose blindness could possibly serve. I asked, in moments I later regretted, whether God had grown tired of my questions and decided to answer them with silence. As days passed, the world narrowed. I moved carefully, memorizing spaces, counting steps, learning the habits of my own home as though I were a guest inside it. Friends noticed my hesitation, my pauses, the way I turned my head to listen rather than to see. Some spoke gently, others with the clumsy pity that wounds more deeply than cruelty. I felt myself withdrawing, not from them, but from the version of myself I had been. The final loss did not arrive dramatically. There was no thunder, no sudden collapse into night. Instead, one morning, light simply failed to appear. I sensed its presence without perceiving its form, like warmth through a wall. I knew then that sight had completed its departure. What remained was not darkness as men imagine it, but an endless interior space, vast and indifferent. I sat alone that day, unmoving. I did not weep. Tears felt too loud for such quiet devastation. My thoughts circled a single fear that refused to loosen its grip, that I would become useless, that my words, once forged through careful observation, would wither without images to feed them, that history would pass me by as another voice silenced before it had finished speaking. In that stillness, another fear emerged, heavier than the rest. What if this darkness was not an obstacle, but a verdict? What if I was being asked to live the remainder of my life unseen, unheard, remembered only for what I failed to finish? The thought pressed against my chest until breathing felt like labor. Yet, even as despair settled, something stubborn remained, a quiet resistance, unheroic and unsure but present. I realized that although my eyes were gone, my mind was still restless. Words still formed in the dark, images still arose, not from sight, but from memory and thought. I did not yet know how I would work, or whether I could endure the years ahead, but I sensed that this ending was also a beginning I did not yet understand. Still, as night fell again, indistinguishable from day, I could not escape one question that echoed without mercy. If I could no longer see the world, would the world still have any reason to see me at all? If I could no longer see the world, I began to wonder whether I must learn to hear it more deeply. The days after that question were not noble. They were clumsy, bitter, ordinary. I rose and reached for habits that no longer fit my hands. I walked into door frames. I mistook voices for footsteps. I held a book and felt its weight as though it were a stone placed on my chest. The room smelled the same. The hearth sounded the same. Yet everything had shifted because my eyes had been the quiet center of my certainty. I was not alone, and yet I felt stranded. There were those who offered help, but help can bruise when pride is tender. Some spoke to me as if blindness had made me a child, as if my thoughts must now be guided like a walking cane. Others avoided me, unsettled by what my darkness suggested about the fragility of their own bodies. I learned quickly that the world does not know how to stand beside a man who has lost something invisible. They want either a miracle or a lesson. I had neither to give. Work, however, did not wait for my grief. England was still burning with argument, and I was still entangled in it. I had served the Commonwealth with my pen, and my words had traveled into places my body could not. Now I was expected to continue, to answer critics, to defend causes, to shape language like a weapon. The irony did not escape me. I could no longer see the very papers on which my duty depended, and yet duty still demanded ink. So I began to dictate. At first, dictation felt humiliating. To speak and have another hand capture my mind was to surrender privacy. It was to expose hesitation, to reveal the messy birth of sentences that would later appear firm. I missed the solitude of writing, the quiet negotiation between thought and line, the ability to revise without anyone watching my uncertainty. Now every pause became visible to another person. Every correction sounded like weakness. I tried different readers, different secretaries, different rhythms. Some read too quickly, swallowing meaning. Some read too slowly, breaking the music of a passage into dull fragments. Some were faithful, some careless.
A single misplaced word could twist a whole argument, and I could not catch it with my eyes. I had to build trust the way a blind man builds a map, by repetition, by patience, by listening for small errors in tone. My household became part of my labor. Voices entered my study and carried away my thoughts. I heard the scrape of quills, the turn of pages, the faint sigh when a sentence grew long. At times I felt like a king issuing commands, and at times like a prisoner forced to speak through bars. The same act could feel powerful one hour and degrading the next. That is what blindness did to me. It made the simplest motions uncertain, and it made my own identity unstable. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being dependent upon those closest to you. Affection becomes complicated. Gratitude can turn into resentment. I would sit and listen to a daughter read back what I had dictated, and I would hear not only my words, but her impatience, her fatigue, her youth wanting another life. I had once imagined myself guiding others through learning and faith, yet now I was the one being guided through my own sentences. One evening after a long session, I asked for a passage to be read again. The reader hesitated. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with reluctance. When the words finally came, I heard they were wrong. Not slightly wrong, but wrong in a way that betrayed the thought behind them. I demanded to know what had been written. The answer arrived with soft excuses, as though error were inevitable and I should accept it like weather. I felt something rise in me, sharp and ashamed. Anger, yes, but also fear. If I could not guard my own meaning, then my mind was no longer mine alone. I dismissed the reader too abruptly. I heard footsteps leave the room. I heard a door close. Then I sat in the darkness and realized that I had wounded the very hands that enabled me to work. That night, I did not pray with eloquence. I prayed as a blind man talks to himself. I asked to be forgiven for bitterness. I asked to be given endurance without cruelty. I asked, most of all, to be spared the slow decay of my spirit, which seemed more threatening than the loss of sight. I could live without the visible world, I told myself, but I could not live without integrity. In the following days, I changed my discipline. I began to build a new method, stern but fair. I listened twice to everything. I required careful repetition. I trained my ear to recognize the shape of a sentence, its balance, its weight. I discovered that sound has its own architecture. A line can stand upright even when no one sees it. A thought can carry light even when the eyes do not. Still, as I adapted, another shadow grew. The political air shifted, and I sensed danger in the voices of men who had once been allies. I had written fiercely, and fierce writing makes enemies that do not
The day
sleep.
I learned
I could
that
not
safety
see the
had
faces that
abandoned
passed
me
judgment
arrived
on me,
without
but I could hear
announcement.
their confidence
It revealed
returning.
itself
Hear
not through
how
sight,
easily
which I
power
no longer
changes
possessed,
hands.
but through
In my
tone.
blindness, I felt
Voices that
exposed,
once carried
as if the
familiarity
darkness around
now
me had
arrived
invited the
measured and
darkness of
distant.
others.
Conversations
And so I continued
paused
to
when I entered a
dictate,
room.
to shape words
Questions were
carefully,
asked
while
around me
wondering what
rather
would
than
happen
to me.
if the nation
I had
served
lived long enough
decided
to
that
know
my
that
silence
such
would
changes
be
do
more
not occur
convenient
without
than my
cause.
voice.
Power had shifted again, and with it came memory, selective and unforgiving. The Commonwealth had fallen. The Restoration had returned old loyalties and revived old resentments. I had written too clearly, too boldly, and those words had survived me better than I had anticipated. Now they were being read not as arguments, but as evidence. I could hear the unspoken verdict forming in the pauses of officials, in the careful politeness that masked suspicion. Blindness does not shield a man from consequence. If anything, it sharpens it. I was arrested and confined. The cell did not frighten me as it might have once. Darkness had already trained me. What unsettled me was the sound of time there, the echo of footsteps beyond the walls, the clink of keys that were never mine, the murmured discussions that stopped abruptly when I listened too closely. I could not see the stone around me, but I could feel its patience. Stone waits. Stone outlasts. I wondered if this was to be the end of my labor, not a dramatic execution, but a slow erasure. I imagined my name spoken softly as an example, then not spoken at all. I imagined my work surviving me in fragments, quoted without context, remembered without mercy. I thought of paradise, which I had not yet fully shaped, and felt a grief deeper than blindness, a grief for something unfinished. There is a particular cruelty in imprisonment when the body is already constrained. I could not walk freely even in open spaces. Now my world narrowed further. Yet within that narrowing, something unexpected occurred. Deprived of movement, deprived of distraction, my mind grew louder. Words assembled themselves without invitation. Lines arrived unbidden, fully formed, waiting patiently in the dark. I recited them silently to myself, afraid to lose them. I held them as one holds a fragile flame. I did not yet understand that this confinement was forcing me inward toward a work larger than any pamphlet or defense. I only knew that my thoughts refused to lie down and die. Even as my future was debated by men whose faces I could not see, my imagination was building landscapes that required no light. I heard rivers in my mind. I felt wings moving through unseen air. I sensed a fall so immense that blindness seemed small beside it. Release came quietly, almost reluctantly. Intervention from friends, the weariness of my accusers, perhaps the inconvenience of executing a blind poet. I was spared, not vindicated. I returned home changed. Freedom felt fragile, conditional. I walked as one already half removed from the world of men. My blindness had separated me physically. My politics had separated me morally. What remained was work, if I dared to attempt it. It was then that the true isolation began. Not the isolation imposed by walls or darkness, but the isolation of relevance. The nation moved forward without me. New voices rose. New conflicts demanded attention. I was no longer necessary. I was no longer dangerous. I was simply present. That quiet dismissal wounded me more deeply than prison ever had. To be opposed is to matter. To be ignored is to fade. I questioned whether my greatest effort had already passed. I questioned whether God had removed my sight to spare me the humiliation of watching my own decline. These thoughts were not dramatic. They arrived gently, persistently, like a drip that hollows stone. Each day I weighed the effort of beginning something immense against the likelihood that it would go unread, uncelebrated, perhaps unfinished. And yet the words would not leave me. They returned each morning with stubborn insistence. They demanded structure.
They demanded voice. They demanded that I trust the darkness that had been given to me. Slowly, I began to accept that blindness had not ended my calling, but had changed its direction. I could no longer write for the moment. I could only write for time. I gathered readers again. I tested my memory, strengthened it, relied upon it more fiercely than ever before. I began to compose entire passages before speaking them aloud. The mind, when denied the eye, compensates with ferocity. I discovered that I could hold hundreds of lines intact, shaped by rhythm and breath. Sound became my ink. Silence became my page. Still, fear lingered. Not fear of failure, but fear of irrelevance. What if this labor consumed years and produced nothing the world wished to keep? What if the darkness within my eyes was mirrored by darkness around my name? I continued anyway, driven not by hope of reward, but by refusal to surrender the only gift that had not abandoned me. As I stood on the edge of this immense undertaking, blind, aging, politically defeated, I sensed that I was about to risk everything that remained of me on a single act of faith, and I could not yet tell whether that faith would save me or finally confirm my obscurity.
Work began without ceremony. There was no announcement, no confidence that this labor would succeed. I did not even allow myself the comfort of naming it at first. To name a thing is to invite judgment, and I had grown weary of the world deciding the worth of my efforts before they were complete. I spoke only of lines, of passages, of thoughts that needed shaping. The greater vision remained unspoken, even to myself. Each morning I awoke with a strange mixture of dread and urgency. Blindness had taught me that time is not measured by light, but by memory. Days bled into one another, distinguished only by the accumulation of words. I dictated slowly, sometimes only a few lines at a sitting, sometimes an entire movement of thought before exhaustion forced me to stop. The body fails more quickly than the mind, especially when the mind has been denied expression for too long. There were moments when the darkness pressed too heavily, not the absence of sight, but the weight of interior silence. In those hours, I questioned whether this work was arrogance disguised as devotion. Who was I, a blind and politically defeated man, to attempt something so vast? Who would listen? Who would care? The voices of critics, long silent, seemed to return in my imagination, sharper than ever because I could not see them to dismiss them. I turned then to memory and faith, not as comforts, but as necessities. I revisited Scripture in my mind, not as doctrine, but as narrative. Stories of obedience that did not lead to reward, stories of suffering that were not explained. I recognized myself in them, not as a hero, but as a witness. If I could bear witness to fall and endurance, perhaps my blindness would serve a purpose beyond my own understanding. The work grew, slowly at first, then with an inevitability that frightened me. I began to sense its shape even when I was not actively composing. It followed me into sleep. Lines arranged themselves while I rested. When I woke, they waited. This frightened me more than failure ever had. To be chosen by a work is a heavier burden than to choose one.
Dictation required patience from all involved. My readers learned my rhythms, my silences, the moments when interruption would fracture a fragile passage. I learned to trust them again, not as mere instruments, but as companions in an act none of us fully understood. Their voices carried my words into the air, and I listened for flaws not with suspicion, but with shared responsibility. The work was no longer mine alone. It passed through other lives, other breaths. There were days when I could not continue. The mind would falter, refuse to hold its architecture. On those days, I sat and listened to the sounds of the house. Footsteps, distant conversation, the settling of wood. Ordinary life continued around this immense labor, indifferent to it. That indifference grounded me. It reminded me that greatness is not announced, it is endured. As months turned into years, isolation deepened. I was present in my household, yet absent from the wider world. I no longer attended gatherings. I no longer followed debates. News arrived filtered through voices that softened its edges. I was removed from the present, anchored instead in a narrative that belonged to no single moment. At times, I wondered whether I was retreating from life or preserving myself for something truer. Fear of death began to intrude. Not sudden death, but the slow realization that the body does not negotiate with ambition. I measured progress not by pages, but by survival. Would my strength last long enough to complete what I had begun? Would memory betray me before the end? These fears did not paralyze me, they disciplined me. I learned to value consistency over inspiration, endurance over brilliance. The darkness, once an enemy, became a collaborator. It removed distraction. It forced inward vision. I began to understand that sight had often deceived me, that surfaces had drawn attention away from substance. Now there were no surfaces, only essence remained. Ideas stood naked, unadorned. If they failed honestly. There was no triumph in this period, only persistence. No applause, only the steady accumulation of work. I did not know whether the world would one day receive it with reverence or indifference. I only knew that abandoning it would mean abandoning myself. In the quiet of those years, I ceased to write for recognition. I wrote to remain faithful to the voice that had not been silenced by blindness. As the work neared its later movements, I sensed that something irreversible had occurred. Whether the world accepted it or not, I had given my remaining strength to a single vision. There would be no second great attempt. This was the sum of me. And as I approached its final passages, a question returned, heavier now than ever. Would this labor outlive the darkness that had shaped it, or would it vanish with me, unheard and unseen?
Completion did not arrive as celebration. It came as silence. The kind of silence that follows endurance, not relief. When the final lines were spoken aloud, there was no certainty in me that they were finished, only a sense that I had reached the furthest edge of what remained possible. My body felt emptied, not triumphant. Years of inward vision had finally found their last shape, and now there was nothing left to hold them back. I listened as the words were read to me, slowly, carefully, from beginning to end. I did not hear perfection. I heard effort. I heard struggle pressed into rhythm. I heard a blind man attempting to give form to questions that had haunted him since light first abandoned his eyes. When the reading ended, no one spoke. That silence was more honest than praise would have been. It acknowledged the weight of what had been attempted without pretending to measure it. By then, I had learned not to hope for understanding. Hope had been reshaped into something quieter. I no longer asked whether the world would recognize my labor. I asked only whether it was faithful to the truth that had driven it. Blindness had stripped ambition of its ornament. What remained was obedience to the work itself. If it survived me, it would do so on its own terms. Age pressed closer. My body reminded me daily that time does not wait for reflection. Strength faded in ways sight never had. Voices around me changed. Some departed. Others grew older alongside me. I became increasingly aware that I lived more in memory than in expectation. The future, once a vast field of possibility, narrowed into a short path whose end I could sense but not see. I thought often of legacy, not as fame, but as residue. What remains of a man when his voice no longer speaks and his name is spoken by others? I had feared being forgotten more than blindness itself. Now that fear softened. Forgetting is not always erasure. Sometimes it is rest. I had spent my life arguing, defending, explaining. In the end, I desired only to leave something honest behind me, something that could stand without me guarding it. Faith, which had once been certainty, became companionship. It did not answer my questions, it sat with them. I no longer demanded reasons for my blindness. I no longer framed it as punishment or reward. It was simply the condition through which my final work had been shaped. Without it, I might never have learned how much can be seen without eyes. There were moments, quiet ones, when doubt returned, when I wondered whether the darkness had narrowed my vision too much, whether I had misunderstood the world by retreating from it. Yet even those doubts felt gentler now. They no longer accused, they accompanied. I had learned that certainty is not required for endurance, only commitment is. As my days shortened, I spent more time listening than speaking. The world came to me through sound and touch, through the presence of others moving around me. I no longer needed to be central. I no longer needed to persuade. I had given what I could give. That knowledge settled over me like evening, neither harsh nor comforting, simply inevitable. I do not know how the world will judge what I left behind. Judgment belongs to time, not to men who cannot outlive it. I know only that I did not surrender when darkness arrived. I did not allow silence to erase me. I carried my questions to the end, unanswered but intact. If there is meaning in blindness, I believe it lies here, that when sight is taken, the soul is forced to reckon with itself. Stripped of distraction, stripped of display, it must decide whether it will still speak. I chose to speak, even when I could no longer see who listened. Now I rest in that choice. Whatever follows is no longer mine to shape. The darkness that once frightened me has become familiar, almost gentle. It does not feel endless anymore. It feels like an opening, not into light, but into quiet continuity. And if my words endure beyond my breath, let them stand as they are, shaped by loss,
carried by faith and spoken by a man who learned, too late and too deeply, that sight was never the only way to see.